Pain woke him before his eyes did. Ethan Cade felt it first in his chest, a deep ache like his ribs had been rearranged by a giant hand. Then came the smell of burnt metal and wet earth, and the sound of wind moving through leaves that did not sound quite like any leaves he knew. He forced his eyes open and saw a sky the color of a bruise, purple and orange, with two pale moons hanging low over broken trees. He was not on Earth. His drop pod lay behind him, half buried in reddish soil, its hull cracked open like an egg. Smoke curled from a dead engine. He remembered the mission in pieces, sharp and out of order. The extraction call, the sudden burst of enemy fire from nowhere, the screams over comms cutting off one by one, the pod's emergency systems screaming warnings as it broke atmosphere and spun out of control. He remembered thinking in the last clear second before the world went black that this was how he was going to die. He was still alive. That fact alone felt impossible. Ethan sat up slowly, testing his limbs. Bruised, cut, one wrist swollen and stiff, but nothing broken that he could tell. His uniform was torn and stained dark with dried blood, some of it his own. His comm unit was dead, its screen shattered. He tapped it anyway, out of habit, and got nothing but silence. Back home, if home even still thought about him, he was already gone. Missing, presumed dead. That was the language they used. The careful military phrase that let commanders write letters to families without promising anything they could not deliver. Ethan Cade, staff sergeant, declared dead somewhere over a hostile drop zone that technically did not exist on any star chart he had access to. There would be a folded flag somewhere, a name on a wall. He almost laughed, except his ribs hurt too much. Get up, he told himself, quiet and rough. Moving is the job now. He checked his gear. A combat knife, a half-empty canteen, one working flashlight, and a sidearm with 6 rounds left. Not much. Enough to survive a day. Maybe 2 if he was careful. He looked around at the alien forest, the strange shapes of the trees, the way the ground seemed to hum faintly under his boots, and understood that careful would not be enough for long. He started walking because standing still felt like giving up. The land around him was quiet, in a way that unsettled him more than noise would have. No birds, or whatever this world used in place of birds. No distant engines, no hum of civilization. Nothing to orient himself by except the angle of the twin moons, still faintly visible against the brightening sky. He tried to remember his training, the survival protocols drilled into him years ago for exactly this kind of situation. Except every protocol he had ever learned assumed he would eventually be found by someone looking for him. Nobody was looking for him. Nobody knew he was alive to look. That thought kept circling back no matter how hard he tried to push it aside. Somewhere a report had already been filed. A commanding officer had already written the words killed in action, or missing and presumed dead, whichever sounded better on paper. His mother, if she was still in the same apartment, would have already gotten the visit. 2 officers in dress uniform standing at her door, hats in hand, saying the careful, rehearsed things people said in that situation. He tried not to think about her face when she heard it. He failed. He pushed the thought down the way he had learned to push down everything that could not help him survive the next hour, and kept walking. The forest thinned after an hour into rolling hills covered in silver grass that bent in waves when the wind passed through it. In the distance, smoke rose, not the black smoke of wreckage, but thin gray smoke, the kind that came from cooking fires. Ethan's pulse picked up. Fire meant people. People meant answers, or at least a direction to run. He moved toward it, keeping low, keeping quiet. Every instinct from years of training telling him to assume the worst until he knew better. What he found on the other side of the hill was a village under attack. Wooden structures, simple but sturdy, arranged in a loose circle around a central well, and tearing through them were creatures unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. 4-legged beasts the size of large dogs, with too many joints in their legs and mouths that opened wider than their skulls seemed to allow. They moved in a pack, snapping and slashing. And the villagers, humanoid but not human, with grayish skin and elongated limbs, were fighting back with spears and crude energy weapons that sparked more than they fired. It was not Ethan's fight. He had no orders here, no command structure, no idea who these people were or what side, if any, he should take. Every rule of engagement he had ever been trained on said to observe first, assess the situation, avoid unnecessary risk. He was already running down the hill before he finished that thought. Later, he would not be able to explain why. Maybe it was the sight of a small figure, one of the alien children pressed against a wall while one of the beasts closed in. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe a soldier who had spent his whole life protecting people simply could not watch and do nothing, even on a world that was not his. He closed the distance fast, knife in hand, and slammed into the beast just as it lunged. The impact sent them both rolling. Ethan came up first, driving the blade into the creature's flank, and it shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, before going still. The child scrambled away, wide-eyed, staring at him. Ethan did not have time to feel anything about that. Two more beasts turned toward him, drawn by the noise, by the smell of fresh blood. He backed toward the well, putting stone at his spine, and raised his sidearm. 6 rounds. He needed to make them count. The first shot dropped one beast clean. The second missed, clipping a shoulder instead of a skull, and the wounded creature came on faster, angrier. Ethan sidestepped, took a slash across his forearm that he barely felt through the adrenaline, and put his last 2 close-range rounds into its throat. His arm burned where the claws had opened it, a long, shallow line from wrist to elbow, but he kept his footing, kept his back to the stone, and watched the last beast circle him once, twice, testing. It was smart enough to hesitate. He was smart enough to let it, saving his strength, waiting for it to commit rather than wasting the last of his energy chasing it. It committed. He met it with the flat of his boot and the last of his momentum, driving it off balance long enough to finish the fight with his knife instead of his empty gun. Silence, sudden and strange, settled over the village. The remaining beasts, sensing the fight had turned, retreated into the tall grass and vanished. Ethan stood in the middle of the wreckage, breathing hard, blood running warm down his arm, and became aware, slowly, that every villager left standing was staring at him, not with gratitude, not yet, with fear. A tall figure pushed through the gathered crowd, moving with the controlled economy of someone who had fought many times before and expected to fight again. Gray-skinned like the others but marked differently, dark lines etched down one side of her face like old scars deliberately kept visible, a long weapon strapped across her back that she now brought forward and leveled directly at Ethan's chest. Her eyes, a pale, unsettling silver, studied him the way a hunter studies something it has not yet decided is prey or predator. "You are not one of the raiders," she said, in halting but understandable words, the language strange but not incomprehensible, as though some old instinct in Ethan's mind was working to translate it in real time. "And you are not one of us." Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms open, empty. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said. I fell. I don't even know where I am." The woman did not lower her weapon. Behind her, the villagers murmured, a low current of unease running through the crowd. Someone said a word Ethan did not understand, and it was repeated, passed from mouth to mouth, until it filled the silence like smoke. "You bled," the woman said, nodding once toward the cut on his arm, toward the dark blood soaking through his sleeve. "You bled like flesh. You fell from the sky and fire, and still you stand. Still you fight, when a creature with wounds like yours should be on the ground." Her finger did not move from the weapon's trigger. "No creature bleeds like you and still stands, still moves, still fights 3 beasts alone and wins." She took one step closer. Close enough now that Ethan could see the weapon was primed, could see her hand steady and sure. "So tell me the truth," she said, voice low, almost gentle, which somehow made it more frightening than a shout would have been. "What are you?" The weapon did not fire. That was the only thought Ethan let himself hold on to in the long, silent moment after the woman asked her question. Her finger stayed near the trigger, but her eyes were doing something else, measuring him, weighing him, the way a soldier weighs a decision she has not yet made. "My name is Ethan," he said carefully, keeping his hands raised, keeping his voice level the way he had been trained to when a situation could go either way. Ethan Cade. I'm a soldier. My ship broke apart in your sky. I don't know how I got here, and I don't know what this place is. I'm not your enemy. The word soldier meant nothing to her, he could tell by the slight tilt of her head. But the tone did. She had heard men and women speak like that before, in the careful, steady cadence of someone trying not to be killed. Vesa, she said finally, lowering the weapon a fraction, though not all the way. You will come with us. Not because I trust you, because the elders will decide what you are, and until they do, you do not leave my sight. That was how Ethan came to live, if it could be called living, on the edge of a village that had no name he could pronounce properly, among people who called themselves the Doran, and watched him the way one watches a fire that might still be burning under the ash. The days that followed blurred together in a strange rhythm. Ethan learned their language faster than he expected, faster than should have been possible, words clicking into place in his mind almost as soon as he heard them repeated. He did not know if it was some effect of the crash, some quiet gift his brain had found in the wreckage of the pod, or simply the desperate focus of a man with nowhere else to put his mind. He learned that the Doran were proud but frightened, that their harvests had been shrinking for years, that livestock died without cause and children were born weaker than their parents remembered being born. They called it the hollowing, and they spoke of it the way people speak of weather they cannot control, with resignation, and underneath the resignation, real terror. He learned that Vesa was their best fighter and that she had been given one task where he was concerned: watch him, and if he proved a danger, end him quickly and without hesitation. She never let him forget it. You eat with us because the elders allow it, she told him on the third night, when he tried to offer half his food to an old man who had given him none. Not because you have earned anything, I know, Ethan said, and pushed the food toward the old man anyway. Vesa watched him do it, her expression unreadable, and said nothing. Small things, Ethan found, mattered more than he expected. He fixed a broken cart axle using tools no one else understood how to use properly. He carried water for an elder whose knees had gone bad, without being asked and without expecting thanks. When one of the beasts that had attacked the village returned in the night, drawn by the smell of livestock, he was the one who woke first, who stood watch until dawn without complaint, without asking for relief. It was not gratitude he was building. He understood that. It was something slower and harder to name, the quiet, accumulating weight of a person who did what needed doing again and again, without asking what it earned him. Vesa noticed. She said nothing about it, but Ethan caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not paying attention. Her silver eyes narrowed not in suspicion now, but in something closer to confusion, as though he did not fit into any shape she had expected him to take. On the sixth day, everything changed. Ethan was helping repair a section of fence when one of the village elders, a stooped, careful man named Oren who spoke rarely and was listened to closely when he did, approached carrying something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a twisted piece of metal, pitted with age, etched with markings that made Ethan's chest go tight. It was the same alloy as his drop pod, the same faint blue sheen, the same strange lightness for its size. Where did you find this? Ethan asked, though some part of him already feared the answer. It has been kept since before my grandmother's grandmother, Oren said. A warning passed down. Something fell from the sky once before, long ago, wearing metal like yours. It did not end well for those who welcomed it. The word settled over the gathered crowd like a physical weight. Ethan saw the shift immediately. The way villagers who had begun, slowly, cautiously, to nod at him in passing, now stepped back, the way old fear reignited faster than new trust could hold against it. That was not me, Ethan said. I don't know anything about what happened before. I only know what happened to me. That may be true, Oren said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a man who had already made up his mind for the good of people he was responsible for. But we cannot risk our children on the difference between truth and coincidence. The council will vote tonight. I believe you already know what they will decide. He did know. He could read it in the faces around him. The same faces that had watched him fight 3 beasts alone 6 days ago, and had not yet decided if that made him a savior or a threat. Fear, once given a shape and a name, was hard to argue with. The council gathered as the twin moons rose, seated in a rough circle at the center of the village, Ethan standing outside it with Vesa, a silent presence at his shoulder. He listened to them speak in low, careful voices about risk, about the safety of the many weighed against the uncertainty of one. He did not fight it. There was nothing to fight. He was a stranger who had fallen from the sky wearing the wrong kind of metal, in a world already bleeding out from a wound it did not understand, and fear made a very reasonable case against him. The vote came quickly. Exile, effective at first light. Ethan would be given supplies for 3 days and sent from the village, alone, back into a world that had already tried once to kill him. He accepted it without argument because arguing would only prove their fear right. Then, the sky lit up. A distant flash, orange and violent, bloomed over the hills in the direction of the crash site, followed seconds later by a low, rolling boom that Ethan felt in his chest before he heard it. Every head in the council turned. Every conversation stopped. Ethan knew that sound. He had heard fuel cores detonate before, on a dozen battlefields that were not this one, and his blood went cold with the recognition. "That was my pod," he said quietly. "That was the fuel core." Vesa was already moving, her hand closing hard around his arm, her expression shifting from suspicion to something sharper, more urgent. "It does not simply explode on its own," she said, low and fast, pulling him toward the village edge as the council erupted into alarmed shouting behind them. Something reached it. Something found it. She looked at him, and for the first time since he had woken on this world, Ethan saw real fear in her eyes. Not of him, but of something else entirely. Something that had just announced itself in fire on the horizon. "Something else knew exactly where to look," she said. "And now it knows exactly where you are." The fire was still burning when Ethan and Vesa reached the crash site, a stubborn orange glow eating through what remained of the pod's frame. They had left the village without the council's permission, without waiting for the exile to become official. Vesa had not asked Ethan whether he wanted to come. She had simply started walking, and he had followed, because whatever had reached his pod was a thread that led back to his own death. The death that had already been declared, filed, and buried without a body. The wreckage was worse than he remembered. What had survived the crash had not survived whatever came after. The hull was torn open in new places, precise cuts rather than the ragged damage of impact. Someone or something had come looking for parts of it specifically, and had known exactly which parts to take. "This was not an accident," Vesa said, crouching near a scorched section of debris. She held up a fragment, small and dark, that did not match the pale blue alloy of Ethan's ship. "This is not your metal." Ethan took it from her, turning it over. The fragment was warm even after the fire. Its edges too smooth, too deliberate, clearly machined rather than grown or forged the way the Doran built their tools. He had seen enough battlefield tech in his life to know precision work when he held it. And this was precision work that did not belong to the pack of beasts that had attacked the village, and did not belong to anything native to this world. "A drone," he said quietly. "Some kind of scout unit. I've seen fragments like this before on missions I can't talk about." He paused, the old training instinct to keep quiet fighting against the simple fact that secrecy did not matter anymore. Not out here. Not with everything already broken. "My unit didn't get ambushed by accident back before the crash. We were hunted. I remember flashes of it now. Coordinated fire, exact timing, weapons that read our shielding before we even knew we'd been found. I told myself it was just bad luck at the time. It wasn't." Vesa studied him, something shifting behind her pale eyes. "You believe whatever hunted your people here has followed you to this world." "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But this," he held up the fragment, "this isn't Doran technology, and it isn't mine either." Ethan turned the fragment over once more in his hand before pocketing it. "Whoever built this wanted it to look like an accident," he said. "That's the part that scares me more than the drone itself. That kind of precision isn't cheap and it isn't careless. Someone spent real resources making sure nobody would ask the right questions about what happened here. Vesa said nothing to that, but she watched him more closely afterward, as though recalculating something in her head. Not whether he was dangerous, but whether the danger following him might be larger than either of them had first assumed. They searched the wreckage together as the fire finally died down to embers, an uneasy partnership built on mutual necessity rather than trust. But necessity, Ethan was learning, had a way of wearing trust into existence whether either side intended it or not. "You risked exile to come here with me," he said eventually, working a piece of debris free from the dirt. "Why?" Vesa did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice had lost its usual hard edge. "The hollowing took my family," she said. "My mother, my younger brother. Not quickly. Slowly, over seasons, the way it takes everyone. Strength fading, harvests failing, until there was nothing left to fight for. The elders call it a sickness of the land. I have never believed that. A sickness does not choose. A sickness does not take from some places and spare others, does not seem to grow worse the longer we search for its cause and find nothing." She looked up at him, something raw in her expression now. "I think something is doing this to us. On purpose. And I think whatever fell from your sky and fire, whatever came looking for it tonight, might finally be a piece of the answer I have been chasing for years." Ethan felt the weight of that confession settle between them, changing something. This was not a woman guarding a suspicious stranger anymore. This was a woman who had lost everything to a mystery she could not solve alone, reaching, however reluctantly, toward the one new thread she had found in years of searching. "Then we look together," Ethan said. "Whatever's out here, we find it before it finds anyone else." They pieced together more fragments as the moons rose higher, enough to sketch the outline of a small reconnaissance drone, built for stealth, built for search patterns Ethan recognized from operations he had flown himself, lifetimes ago, on missions he was never supposed to speak of. It had not come for wreckage, it had come for a signal, a trace, something that would confirm whether a survivor had made it out of that crash alive. "It was looking for me," Ethan said, the realization settling cold in his stomach. "Not the pod. Me. I never told anyone that before," Vesa admitted almost to herself, surprised at her own words. "Not the elders. Not even the others who lost as much as I did. It felt like admitting weakness, to say I did not believe the story everyone else had agreed to accept." "It's not weakness," Ethan said. "Where I'm from, the people who keep asking questions after everyone else has stopped are usually the ones who end up finding the answer." She looked at him for a long moment, something unguarded passing across her face before the old discipline reasserted itself. "Then let us find it," she said, standing, brushing ash from her knees, "before whatever burned this place decides to come back and finish what it started." The forest went quiet around them, too quiet, the way it goes quiet right before something changes. Vesa froze, her head turning sharply toward the tree line. "Down!" she snapped, and shoved Ethan hard toward the dirt a half-second before the world cracked apart with gunfire. The shot that would have taken Vesa's head clean off tore instead through empty air where she had been standing, close enough that Ethan felt the heat of it pass. He was moving before he finished processing the sound, pulling her fully behind the twisted remains of the pod's hull as a second shot chewed through metal inches from where they crouched. That sound. Ethan knew that sound in his bones, in the part of a soldier's mind that never fully turns off. It was not alien weapons fire. It was not the crude spark and burn energy weapons the Doran carried. It was the flat, precise crack of a human rifle, fired by someone who knew exactly how to use it. "Human," he breathed, disbelief and dread tangled together in his chest. "That's a human weapon." Vesa's eyes cut to him, sharp with a question she did not have time to ask. Another shot came, closer this time, and through the smoke and the settling dust Ethan caught a flash of movement at the tree line, a figure in dark tactical gear, moving with the same disciplined economy Ethan had spent years training into his own body. No mistaking it now, no explaining it away. The insignia on that armor, half glimpsed in the moonlight, was one Ethan recognized. Not from any unit patch he had ever worn proudly. From something buried deeper, something classified, something that lived in the part of his memory the crash had shaken loose along with everything else. Whoever was shooting at them was not alien. They were human. And they had come a very long way to a world no star chart Ethan had ever seen acknowledged existed, for exactly one reason. They had come for him. Ethan moved before the fear could catch up with him, the old instinct taking over the way it always had in the worst moments of his life. He caught the shooter's second reload, a half-second gap, small but real, and broke from cover, closing the distance across open ground while Vesa laid down what cover fire she could with her own weapon. The gunman turned, too slow, and Ethan slammed into him before another shot could be fired, driving them both to the ground in a tangle of impact and adrenaline. The fight was short and brutal. Ethan had the advantage of desperation, of a body that had already been declared dead once and had nothing left to lose in proving otherwise. He pinned the man's arm, forced the rifle aside, and pressed his forearm hard against the stranger's throat, close enough now to see the face beneath the tactical helmet's raised visor. A face that could have belonged to any soldier Ethan had ever served beside. Human. Ordinary. Terrified. "Who sent you?" Ethan said, low and hard, not a question so much as a demand. "Who are you?" The man coughed, blood at the corner of his mouth from where he'd bitten his tongue in the fall, or from something worse, an injury Ethan hadn't caused. "Cade," he rasped, and the sound of his own name in a stranger's mouth on an alien world hit Ethan like another impact entirely. "You're not supposed to be alive." "Yeah," Ethan said. "I've heard that a lot lately." "Talk." The man's eyes flicked past Ethan's shoulder toward Vesa, toward the darkness beyond her, with an expression that was not defiance but something closer to resignation. "Black program," he managed. "Deep enough that most of command doesn't know it exists. They didn't send us to extract your unit. They sent us to contain what was on your ship." He coughed again, worse this time. "You were never supposed to make it out of that crash. None of you were." "I don't believe you," Ethan said, though some cold, honest part of him already did. "Nobody sends a Black Ops team across the stars to clean up a routine crash. You knew exactly where to find me. You knew what to look for. That means somebody up the chain knew what I was carrying before I ever got on that ship." The man's laugh came out broken, more pain than humor. "You really don't know, do you?" He shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "They picked your unit for a reason, Cade. Not randomly. Not because you were the best or the worst. Because of what showed up in your blood work during the last physical, nobody explained to you properly. They flagged you years ago. This whole mission was built around making sure that flag never made it back to anyone who might ask questions." "What flag?" Ethan said, dread coiling tighter in his chest. "What's in my blood? What was on my ship?" The answer never came. A single shot cracked through the night from somewhere farther back in the tree line, and the man's body went slack beneath Ethan's hands, the light gone out of his eyes before Ethan even registered the wound. A clean kill. A silencing. Ethan dropped low instinctively, dragging the body's weight with him for cover, scanning the darkness for a second shooter he could not see, would likely never see. Whoever had fired that shot had not missed. They had not needed to get close. They had simply made certain a dying man never finished a sentence. Vesa reached him a moment later, breathing hard, her weapon still raised, eyes sweeping the tree line. "There is no one else out there now," she said after a long, tense silence. "Whoever killed him is gone." Ethan knelt beside the body, searching it with the efficient, practiced motions of a soldier who had done this before, in other wars, for other reasons. He found a corporate insignia stitched into the inner lining of the jacket, small and deliberately hidden. Not a military patch at all, but a company crest Ethan did not recognize, sharp-edged and unfamiliar. He found no other identification, no name, no unit. Whoever had sent this man had made very sure he could never be traced back to them, even in death. Ethan closed the man's eyes with 2 fingers, an old habit from other battlefields, other bodies he had not been able to save. It felt strange to offer that small mercy to someone who had tried to kill him minutes earlier. But the man had also been, in the end, just another soldier following orders he probably hadn't fully understood either. That was a kind of grief Ethan recognized too well to ignore. He sat back on his heels, the fragments of the last few minutes, settling into a shape he did not want to see clearly. His death had not been an accident. His unit had not stumbled into an ambush by chance. Someone, somewhere, with resources far beyond a standard military operation, had engineered his squad's destruction and had then sent people to make absolutely certain he did not survive it. And when he had survived anyway, they had followed him across the stars to finish the job. "He said you carried something," Vesa said quietly, watching him with an expression Ethan could not fully read. "On your ship, something they wanted contained." "I don't know what he meant," Ethan said, and it was the truth which felt worse than a lie would have. "I was a soldier, I followed orders. Nobody tells you everything, not in the kind of unit I was in. I could have been carrying something and never known it." Vesa was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving from the dead man to Ethan, weighing something. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone cold again, the warmth of the last hours retreating behind old suspicion. "Your people are capable of this," she said, "killing their own, silencing their own, to protect a secret." She gestured at the corpse between them. "Tell me honestly, Ethan Cade, are you the first of your kind to come here, or only the first we have caught?" "I don't know," Ethan said again, because it was the only answer he had. "I swear to you, I don't know." Before Vesa could respond, a third figure emerged from the shadows near the tree line. Not another gunman, but Oren, the elder, moving with a speed that belied his age, his face pale in the moonlight, his eyes fixed not on Ethan, but on something further back in his own memory. "I followed," Oren said, breathless, before either of them could ask. "I heard the explosion, and I followed, and I have heard everything." He looked at the dead man, at the strange dark metal fragments scattered across the crash site, and something in his expression cracked open, decades of careful restraint giving way all at once. "There is a name I have not spoken aloud since I was a boy, a name my grandmother forbade us from saying near water, near crops, near anything that could still grow. I did not believe it was more than an old story. I do not believe that any longer." "What name?" Ethan asked, though some cold part of him already dreaded the answer. "The hollowing did not begin as sickness," Oren said. "It began the last time beings fell from the sky wearing metal like yours. That is the story my grandmother told, and her grandmother told her, passed down like a wound that never fully closes." His eyes, wet now, fixed on Ethan with something between accusation and desperate hope. "Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps the stars simply send strangers to us again and again, and this means nothing. But I have buried enough of my people to no longer trust in coincidence." Vesa's weapon had not moved, but her hand had gone very still around it, her knuckles pale. She turned to Ethan, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it, stripped of its usual hard certainty, laid bare with a fear too old and too personal to hide any longer. "Did your kind do this to us?" "No," Ethan said, and made himself hold Vesa's gaze while he said it. "I don't believe that, and I intend to prove it even if it costs me everything I have left. It was not enough, not yet. Not against generations of buried fear given a fresh wound to bleed from." But Vesa did not raise her weapon again, and Oren, shaking, old grief written plainly across his face, did not order him away either. That, Ethan understood, was its own kind of answer. Not trust. Not yet. But a door left open a crack instead of slammed shut. "Then help me prove it," Oren said finally. "There are ruins beneath the old temple grounds, sealed since before my grandmother's time, forbidden to enter. If your arrival and our sickness share a history, the answer will be there, buried with everything else we chose not to remember." Sleep was not an option, not with a body still cooling behind them and a corporate insignia that meant more questions than answers. But Ethan forced himself to eat something before they set out, knowing from long experience that exhaustion killed as surely as any bullet. Vesa said little on the walk, Her earlier fire banked down into something more watchful, more careful, as though she had decided to hold judgment in reserve until she saw whatever the ruins had to show them. They reached the ruins before dawn, a structure half swallowed by the earth, its remaining walls built from stone that did not match anything else in Doran architecture. Smooth, seamless, carved with the same pale blue alloy sheen Ethan had seen in his own crashed pod, and in the fragment of forbidden metal Orin had first shown him. His pulse climbed as he ran a hand along the surface. This was not coincidence. This was the same origin, the same hand, reaching across a gap of centuries. Inside, the air was cold and still, undisturbed for longer than anyone living could remember. Fessa led with her weapon raised, Orin close behind with an old lantern, and Ethan last, every soldier's instinct in him screaming that they were walking into something far larger than themselves. They found the chamber at the structure's heart, a circular room dominated by a dormant machine embedded into the floor and walls, its surface etched with symbols that made Ethan's skin crawl with a recognition he could not explain, could not place, and yet felt in his bones the way he had felt the pull toward this world's language. In the machine's center sat a crystalline core, dark and lifeless but somehow watching, the way a held breath watches for the moment to release. "This is where the sickness began," Orin whispered, his voice barely audible. "I am certain of it now. I can feel it the way one feels a wound long after the wound has closed." Ethan ran the lantern light along the walls, counting the same symbols repeated in patterns too deliberate to be decoration. They looked almost like circuitry, almost like language, almost like something meant to be read by a mind very different from his own, and yet some part of him kept catching flickers of meaning at the edge of understanding, like words on the tip of his tongue in a language he had never studied. Ethan approached slowly, and as he drew close, faint lines of light traced along the machine's surface, responding to something, his presence, his proximity, the alloy in his blood or his bones or wherever this ancient thing was reading from. Symbols shifted, and to his own shock understanding bloomed in his mind unbidden, fragments of meaning surfacing the same way the Doran language had, as though something in him had been quietly built to read exactly this. "It's not sickness," Ethan said slowly, piecing the fragmented understanding together as it surfaced. "It's a system, a culling system, left behind by something old, something that isn't native to this world any more than I am." He swallowed hard, the pieces locking into place with sickening clarity. There was a war once long before any of us, a race that came before, call them precursors, call them whatever you want. And when it ended, whoever survived decided the only way to prevent another war on this scale was to make sure no other species ever grew strong enough to fight one. Worlds like this get seeded with something that slowly weakens anything that starts to rise too far, too fast. Not destruction, not all at once, just enough to keep a species from ever becoming a threat. Vessa's face had gone pale, her weapon lowering slightly, disbelief and horror warring across her features. "You are saying our world was chosen, deliberately, punished for the crime of surviving too well." "I'm saying it's been managed," Ethan said. "Kept small, kept weak, for longer than anyone alive can remember, long enough that you forgot it was ever anything but bad luck and bad soil." Orin sank against the nearest wall, an old man's grief and rage tangled together in a way that made Ethan's chest ache to witness. "My mother," he said. "My daughter. Not sickness, not chance." His hands trembled around the lantern. A machine deciding who lives strong and who withers, for a war that ended before any of us were born. Ethan turned back to the core, and something colder settled into him as the final piece surfaced from the flood of borrowed understanding. "It's not just managing you," he said slowly. "It's cataloging threats, anomalies, anything that doesn't fit the pattern it expects." He looked down at his own hands, at the faint, unnatural steadiness of a body that should have died in that crash, should have died again on that battlefield years before it, should by every reasonable measure already be dead several times over. "It's been reading me since the moment I got close enough. Whatever this thing is, it already knows I don't fit its patterns. That's why the hunters came. Not for a secret on board my ship. For me. For whatever it is about me that this system already flagged as something dangerous enough to erase. The truth of it settled over the chamber like a held breath finally released. Vesa stepped closer to him, something fierce and decided replacing the fear in her expression, an old instinct choosing a side even before her mind had finished the argument. "Then we do not run from it," she said. "We do not wait for it to decide what to do with you. With us. With everyone this thing has ever quietly starved." Her hand found the edge of the machine's console, hovering over symbols Ethan realized. With a jolt, she should not have been able to read at all. And yet her fingers moved with a certainty that suggested some old, buried instinct in her people recognized this place too, deeper than memory, deeper than story. If it must see us, let it see us clearly. Let it see what stands here together, and choose to defy it rather than beg. "Vesa, wait!" Ethan started, but her hand had already come down. The core flared to life, a light so sudden and violent it filled the entire chamber, and the ground beneath their feet did not simply tremble. It groaned, deep and ancient, like something enormous drawing its first breath in 1,000 years. Dust and stone rained from the ceiling. Somewhere far above them, beyond the buried chamber, Ethan heard the unmistakable sound of the earth itself beginning to split open. Oren scrambled backward, eyes wide with terror. "What have we done?" he breathed. Ethan grabbed Vesa's arm, pulling her back from the console as more light poured from the core. As the ancient symbols across every wall began to burn bright and fierce, and as somewhere beneath their feet, something vast and long dormant finally began, for the first time in 1,000 years, to stir. The temple's roof tore open like paper, and out of the widening crater rose something that had waited 1,000 years to move again. It was not alive, not in any way Ethan understood the word, but it moved like something that remembered purpose. A construct of dark alloy and pale light, vast and ancient, its surface etched with the same symbols that covered the chamber walls below. It rose above the ruins, above the tree line, casting a shadow across the last stars of the fading night, and Ethan felt, with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than logic, that it was already looking for him. "Run!" Oren shouted, dragging himself upright, terror plain on his face. "Whatever mercy this thing might have shown us in ignorance, it will show none now that it has woken." Ethan did not run. He had spent his whole life running toward danger instead of away from it. And something in him, some stubborn core that had survived a crash he was never meant to survive, refused to break that habit now. "Vesa," he said, pulling her up beside him, both of them staring at the awakening guardian as it turned, slow and deliberate, toward the temple ruins. "If this thing is a system built to erase threats, it's already decided I'm one, which means it's not choosing between our two peoples. It's choosing whether to erase both of us together right now." "Then we do not give it an easy choice," Vesa said. And there was no fear left in her voice, only the hard, clear resolve of a warrior who had already lost everything the hollowing could take from her and refused to lose what remained. The guardian's light swept over the village in the distance, and alarms, ancient, buried, waking alongside it, began to sound from smaller structures scattered across the hills, structures Ethan realized with a jolt were not ruins at all, but dormant defense systems, seeded across this world the same way the hollowing itself had been. The precursors had not left one guardian behind. They had left a network, patient and thorough, waiting for exactly this moment. What followed was not a battle Ethan could win with a sidearm in 6 rounds. It was not a battle any single fighter, human or Doran, could win alone. But as the Guardian's smaller drones descended toward the village, toward the people who had taken in a stranger out of fear, and slowly, painfully, learned to trust him instead, Ethan understood that this fight was never going to be won with weapons. It was going to be won the same way he had earned Vesa's trust in the first place. One impossible, stubborn refusal at a time. He led the defense not because he was the strongest fighter or the best strategist, but because he refused at every turn to accept that the fight was already lost. When a drone breached the village's outer fence, he was the one who threw himself into its path, buying seconds for children to be pulled to safety. When Vesa fell, pinned beneath collapsed timber, he was the one who dragged her free even as another drone's weapon scorched the ground beside them. when Oren, too old and too frightened to fight, stood anyway at the well's edge and hurled stones at a machine built for war. 1,000 years before he was born, Ethan understood, with sudden and total clarity, exactly what he was fighting for. Not survival, not escape. A world that had given a dead man somewhere to belong. The Guardian itself finally descended into the heart of the village, its light sweeping across the chaos, cataloging, calculating, preparing to render its ancient judgment. Ethan stood before it, Vesa at his side despite her wound, Oren and a dozen villagers behind them, and felt the machine's attention settle on him fully for the first time. Reading him, weighing him, the same way it had read the core chamber beneath the temple. He did not run. He did not raise a weapon that would mean nothing against something like this. He simply stood, bleeding, exhausted, refusing. "You were built to erase anything strong enough to become a threat," Ethan said, not knowing if the thing could even understand him, not caring anymore whether it did. "But you never accounted for this. You never accounted for a species that doesn't calculate its own extinction as acceptable. That doesn't run when the math says it should. That doesn't abandon people who took it in when it had nowhere else to go." He straightened, ignoring the pain in every part of his body. That's what humanity is. Not the strongest, not the smartest, just the ones who refuse to quit and refuse to leave anyone behind while they're at it. For a long moment nothing happened. The Guardian's light held steady on him, ancient calculations running through whatever remained of its long dormant purpose. Then, slowly, impossibly, the light began to dim. It did not attack. It did not retreat in any dramatic collapse. It simply gradually powered down, folding back into a quiet, watchful stillness, as though whatever judgment it had been built to render had encountered something in its calculations it did not have a category for, and in the absence of certainty, had chosen to wait rather than destroy. Across the hills, the smaller drones stilled as well, one by one, the network falling silent as its central authority fell silent first. The village, battered and burning in places, still stood. In the days that followed, the hollowing did not vanish overnight. Old wounds like that do not close in a season. But the crops that had struggled for years began, slowly, to show the first signs of real strength, as though whatever quiet hand had been holding this world back had finally, tentatively loosened its grip. Oren, standing among the recovering fields with tears he no longer bothered to hide, told Ethan it might take a generation to know for certain. Ethan told him he intended to be there to see it. Vesa found him that evening at the edge of the village, looking up at a sky that no longer felt like a reminder of everything he had lost, but simply like sky. "The council has reversed its decision," she said, standing beside him without the careful distance she had once kept. "You are no longer exiled." A pause and something almost like a smile. "You are, in fact, difficult to get rid of." "I've been told that before," Ethan said, "by people who meant it as a complaint." "I do not mean it as one," Vesa said quietly. They stood together in silence for a while, two people who had started as stranger and guard, suspicion and fear, and had become something neither of them had words for yet, something built the slow way, through nights of standing watch and small acts of stubborn decency, through fights survived side by side. Later, at the village memorial stone where the Doran carved the names of those the hollowing had taken, Vesa knelt with a chisel in hand and began carving a new mark beside the old ones, not among the names of the dead, but set apart, distinct, the first of its kind. Ethan asked her what it meant. "It means outcast," Vesa said, not looking up from her work, but not in the way it once did. Not someone cast out. She finished the final line and sat back, studying it. "Someone who was cast toward us instead, who fell from the sky with nothing and chose again and again to stay." Ethan knelt beside her, looking at the mark, at the small permanent proof that a man declared dead on a world he would never see again had found, against every reasonable expectation, a place that was willing to call him home. "Then I suppose," he said quietly, "I finally know what I am." Vesa looked at him, and for the first time since the night she had held a weapon to his chest and demanded an answer to that very question, Her silver eyes held nothing but certainty. "You are ours," she said. "Whatever else the stars decide to send after you, you are ours now. And we do not give up what belongs to us without a fight." Above them, the two moons rose together, and for the first time since he had woken in the wreckage of a ship that was never supposed to bring him this far, Ethan Cade did not feel like a ghost of a world he had lost. He felt, simply and completely, like a man who had finally come home.